world. I'm Maggie Fox. This podcast is brought to you by the One Health Trust, with bite-sized insights into ways to help address challenges such as infectious diseases, climate change, and pollution. A One Health approach recognizes that everything on this planet, the animals, plants and people, and the climate and environment are all linked. Antibiotic resistance is a big problem, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast. It happens when bacteria can withstand the effects of antibiotics. Sometimes we call them drug-resistant superbugs. The trouble is, you can't tell by symptoms alone whether someone is infected by a drug-resistant germ. You can't even tell what particular species of bacteria is causing an infection, and it might be a virus or even a fungal infection. Different antibiotics treat different types of bacteria, and of course, antibiotics are no good against viruses or fungal infections. So, doctors test patients when they can. The trouble is, those tests can take days to come back, precious days during which patients may go untreated or get the wrong treatment. Fast tests, best of all, on-the-spot tests, can tell a caregiver right away what the best treatment is for someone. That means they don't waste time with the wrong antibiotic, which can also drive the evolution of even more drug-resistant bacteria. In this episode, we're chatting with Jasmin Major, who works with an organization called ChallengeWorks. They award the Longitude Prize, which recognizes innovation in medicine. The latest prize has gone to a company that invented a fast test for urinary tract infections, which will affect more than half of women sometime in their lives. Jasmin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Maggie.
Jasmin, we talk about antimicrobial resistance a lot on this podcast. One thing we don't talk about too much, however, are diagnostic tests. Can you tell us why testing is so important?
So antibiotics, as your listeners will know, are at the heart of modern medicine. So cancer therapy, transplants, so many procedures rely on us having access to effective antibiotics. But after such a long time of using antibiotics inappropriately, using them when they're not needed, or using them in a way that isn't targeted to the patient, bacteria are developing resistance to these antibiotics at a much quicker pace. And that threatens a future where we don't have access to these life-saving drugs. So in terms of where diagnostics come in, they can help clinicians to better manage the antibiotics that we do have. So they're only being used when they're needed and in a targeted way. So in that way, they can help us safeguard these drugs, which are so precious, and conserve them, but also potentially bring in previously retired antibiotics back into use. But really importantly, we need them at the point of care. So if I go to my clinician with symptoms of an infection, they can confirm on the same day whether I have an infection and prescribe me with the right treatment for me, but only if I need an antibiotic. And then that saves me from a fate where I'm given treatment after treatment that doesn't work for me, devastating impacts on my health. Or on the other hand, I'm given a treatment that I don't need, so worsening resistance. So the Longitude Prize on antimicrobial resistance on AMR set out in 2014, so a decade ago, to incentivize the development of a rapid point-of-care diagnostic that could tell the clinician, does a patient have a bacterial infection? And if so, what antibiotic will work for them? So the program is very much focused on diagnostics, but that's in no way to say that diagnostics are a silver bullet for AMR. They're one tool, be it a very essential tool in the toolkit as part of a coordinated approach to tackling AMR.
Jasmin, can you tell us a little bit about the company that's won the most recent prize?
Sure. So the prize has been won by a Swedish company called Sysmex Astrego, and they first started competing in the prize 10 years ago with an early idea that had been developed in the laboratory, which then was made into a commercial product thanks to them forming a startup with a team that were already working in industry. And now, with winning the £8 million prize, we hope to see that propel them and catalyse their solution to be scaled up and accessible in lots of different settings across the world.
Their test detects whether bacteria are causing someone's urinary tract infection and also identifies then whether this infection is antibiotic resistant. Can you talk about why that's so important?
UTI, which the test is focused on, is an extremely common infection. So it affects 92 million people across the world every year, and it costs the US health system almost $2 billion in expenditure every year. But because of the lack of rapid, accurate diagnostics at the point of care, clinicians that see patients with symptoms of UTI are tending to prescribe antibiotics empirically. They don't know necessarily, based on actionable information from a diagnostic, whether the patient needs an antibiotic, and if so, which one to prescribe. So often they are dispensing antibiotics which the patient may not need or might not work for them, kind of with potentially detrimental impacts to the patient's health, but also contributing to speeding up the development of resistance. So with this test, the clinician can identify whether the patient has a UTI within 15 minutes, and if they do, what antibiotic they will respond to in 30 to 45 minutes. So giving the clinician actionable information at the point of care that can inform what treatment decision they make. And currently it takes 3 days, 2 to 3 days, to find out what antibiotic a patient will be sensitive to. So this really means that they can make informed decisions that are based on personalised information from the patient's test result at the point of care.
Is there something else that could cause the symptoms of a UTI that's not a bacteria, or are there different bacteria that cause these infections?
There are a huge number of different bacteria that can cause these infections, both gram-negative bacteria, gram-positive bacteria, but as you say, not also necessarily bacteria. It could be fungi. And the cause of a UTI can vary quite a lot depending on where you are in the world. So in most cases, in lots of contexts, including the UK and the US, E. coli is the cause of the majority of UTIs, but that's not necessarily the case everywhere.
When you talk about gram-negative and gram-positive, these are just different types of bacteria, but they require completely different antibiotics to treat them.
Exactly. They're two different classifications of bacteria. But different causes of UTI, as you say, will need different treatments. So when diagnostic companies are developing their tests, they tend to begin with focusing on a small number of causes, a small number of pathogens that cause a UTI that are the most common. And then as they continue to develop and validate their tests in the real world, meaning they test samples that have been given by real patients in clinical settings, they start to see whether their test can detect other more rare types of pathogens, less common causes of UTI, to see whether their test is applicable for a wide range of uses, a wide range of different UTIs caused by different pathogens.
One thing that you noted in the prize announcement that intrigued me: some antibiotics are no longer used because so many bacteria have become resistant to them, but it's not 100% of infections or even 50% of infections. It's sometimes just 20 to 30% of infections, which means it might be possible to start using some antibiotics again.
Sure. Just to take an example, if you make believe that I'm a clinician and a patient, call the patient Sam, comes in to see me with symptoms of a UTI, I hear more about their symptoms and I think that I should prescribe them an antibiotic. I think about prescribing them antibiotic A, but antibiotic A, 25% of the population is resistant to. So I prescribe them with antibiotic B instead, which is problematic in a number of ways. Sam might not need the antibiotic in the first place. Taking antibiotic B is, in an avoidable way, it's speeding up resistance to this drug. And before you know it, another portion of the population are resistant to antibiotic B and you're on to antibiotic C. Or there's another scenario where Sam does need the antibiotic, but actually they are in the 75% of the population for which antibiotic A is effective. But as a clinician, I wouldn't know that because I don't have the diagnostics at the point of care to give me that information. So if I had access to a diagnostic like the PA100 AST system that's been developed by Astrego at the point of care, I can test whether my patient would respond to antibiotic A, whether they are in that 75%. So in that way, these novel diagnostics can help to bring back antibiotics that are actually out of routine use.
Could this test be developed to diagnose other types of infections, like maybe a respiratory infection?
That's a really good question. The Longitude Prize on AMR set out 10 years ago in search for a novel rapid diagnostic test that could help conserve antibiotics, but it didn't specify what that test had to target, which infection it should focus on. But when assessing the potential for products within the prize to achieve the transformative impact that we were looking for, the judges did think about the potential that different solutions had to be transferable to other infections beyond the first one that they were focusing on. So the winning test, the PA100 system, is a UTI test, and that is the first application of this really novel, groundbreaking technology. But once that product is out in the world, scaled up and reaching more patients, the company will start to investigate in more detail what the other applications of the technology might be. So right now, the focus is on UTI, but there's definitely potential for it to be transferred to other use cases. So yeah, we're excited to see where they take it.
Jasmin, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been really good to talk.
Listeners, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it. You can learn more about this podcast and other important topics at onehealthtrust.org. And let us know what else you'd like to hear about at owh@onehealthtrust.org. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for listening to One World, One Health, brought to you by the One Health Trust. I'm Ramanan Lakshminarayan, founder and president of the One Health Trust. You can subscribe to One World, One Health on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at One Health Trust, one word, for updates on One World, One Health and the latest in research on One Health issues like drug resistance, disease spillovers, and the social determinants of health. Finally, please do consider donating to the One Health Trust to support this podcast and other initiatives and research that help us promote health and well-being worldwide. Until next time.